All right, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Hello, yes, we can hear you. Good
All right,
morning.
all right, great. Thank you, Tanya, for helping us facilitate this. My name is Jennifer Maxwell. I'm the Digital Accessibility Coordinator at Community College of Denver. So I currently work in our Teaching Learning Center on accessibility, but I have a number of years of experience working in accessibility centers and disability services office. So I've also have a physical and visual disability. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about is really a passion project for me and something I experienced, coming out of high school 25 years ago now. So I'll go ahead and turn the introduction over to my co-presenter, Wendith.
Hey there, my name is Wendith. I am currently a concurrent enrollment program advisor at CCD, but I worked for 2.5 years with Jennifer Maxwell while I was at the TLC for 2.5 years prior. I have a master's in student development and a master's in education technology. And this is a passion project of mine, but it's more motivated by anger than experience. So I'm not as good at pulling punches as some of the other folks in this conversation are.
Yeah. So thanks for the intro, Wendith. And today we're going to do a little visual activity and a little not, just because I do like to mix things up and make this as interactive as possible and accessible as possible, because I do use assistive technology. And that way, if anyone else here does, we can make sure we're being inclusive to everyone. So I just wanted to start out getting a read of the room. So if you all could put in the chat what your role is, whether you're an administrator in high school, college, what your role is, that kind of thing, just type it out in the chat, and then we'll get sort of a number of different folks in different areas. And Wendith or Tanya, if you could keep an eye on that.
Great, yep, I'll keep an eye on the chat.
Okay, thanks. What are our numbers looking like?
Pretty good. We've got a lot of community college administrators, CTE coordinator, high school college advisor.
All right.
They're
awesome.
going fast, so we got a lot.
Yes, I bet. So yeah, and the reason I asked that is because the next question that we had as your presenters is, how many of you are aware of students already in your CE program that are already accommodated, or maybe you think they are but not sure how to get them help? Just feel free to drop that in the chat as well, and then we can have some verbal conversation around that if you're comfortable. All right, so what's it looking like for our answers there?
Yes, there are quite a few students. I noticed one of the participants is actually their son. So Shireen Chase said yes, and it's actually my son. There's lots of discussion about college versus high school accommodations, but I don't directly work with students. So we have some that are working with students and some that are. We've had a few students with 504s and I think one IEP in the last 3 years. And then, yes, we have a few. Those are some of our answers.
All right, and now, like I said, I do want to share some visuals here, and I am using assistive technology, so hopefully you can see my visual with side-by-side comparison. So now I'm gonna turn it over to Wendy where she can talk about the differences between high school select and college select, generally speaking, and then how that also applies to students with accommodations.
Right. So those who are fairly new to concurrent enrollment and even our students don't fully understand that there are two paths. I'll make it quick since it seems like everyone in here works with concurrent enrollment. So our high school select students are on the high school campus. Their English 121 might just be their random third period. The teacher or instructor of record may be a qualified high school teacher, or it may be a CCD instructor, or your college instructor with a high school liaison. We do have students with an IEP and 504s who participate, and they do receive accommodations through their high school. We're going to go a little bit more into that, how that works. On the college select side, that is when the student takes the class through the college, in my case, CCD. That can be asynchronous, that can be online, high flex, whatever, but it's taken through CCD. So it's a purely CCD or college instructor. And in this case, that the student must go to the accessibility center, even if it's just for one class, and receive that care, that evaluation, and then receive that accommodation letter from the college.
All right, thank you, Wendy. Yes, and so as you said, and as a lot of you heard in the last presentation, those MOUs, those agreements are really the key to making that work successfully in both these programs. But as I mentioned in the last presentation, it's also critical for students with disabilities entering into these programs that while they may have the support of their high school program, that they start learning self-advocacy skills and also learning how to advocate for accommodations once they fully transition to college. And I was going to talk a little bit about some of the differences too in accommodations, but it sounds like contrary to when I was growing up, as they say, that concern about, oh well, if we do this high school accommodation in college, it's gonna water down our degrees or hurt our accreditation. But it sounds like from what the last presenter was saying, that's becoming less of an issue. So I just wanted to open it up at this point to a little bit of discussion, either in the chat or feel free to unmute yourselves. But since you're in this field, what are you seeing surrounding those issues of self-disclosing, advocacy, things like that? And like I said, feel free if you want to make a comment to the group, feel free to do that as well. And if
Hi,
anyone...
Jennifer. My name is Kristen. I live in Leadville. I work for Colorado Mountain College. I had to move for a second.
No problem.
So I couldn't speak right away. So we have a good number of students who take, well, first I work with a few schools, 3 different school districts. And at one, we have several students who take our CTE courses on our campus. And so they work very well with our accessibility services coordinator, and their case managers are very helpful with having them email and kind of walking them through the steps and directing them and helping guide them. But once the student gets to our campus, they're on their own, and the students tend to do very well. And one of the schools I work with is an hour and a half away from us. So that's very challenging. We don't have a door really close by. So their case managers can't just walk them over to campus, so we struggle with that. And then we do have some questions that come to our way. Whether if a student is in a class at the high school taught by a high school teacher, are they using their IEP 504 accommodations, modifications, at the high school level using their services? Or are they supposed to be using the college level ones since it's at the college level class? So that is a confusing area. And I feel like a big issue that I have heard recently with surrounding schools, not just ones I serve, but people say, oh, well, if a student has an IEP or a 504, chances are they're not placing college level with an active placer. Chances are they're not going to be in some of those classes. And that is really disheartening to me because I disagree.
Agreed, yes.
So that's me just kind of vomiting all of my venting there.
No worries. Yeah, no, I totally understand that. Do you know, does CMC have an MOU or agreement with your school districts stipulating those?
So we have an MOU, but I don't know I have not reviewed the MOU to see if there's anything in there with accessibility services. We have just your basic MOU that we're partners and, we serve the school districts for concurrent enrollment, but I don't know if there's anything specific in there in regards to accessibilities.
Okay. Yeah, and it sounds like based on what our last presenter was saying, Wenda, you can probably tell us her name, but she was talking about how that seems to be the foundation for what makes these programs more successful and less ambiguous. So yeah.
Right. So currently, the way DPS does it is that the 504 and IEP that the student has when they receive enrollment in that high school select, so that's that class that's taking place at the high school, when that student is enrolled, DPS then sends out a letter that goes to the student, the parent and guardian, that explains, hey, you're taking a concurrent enrollment course, make an appointment with your case manager or your counselor who handles your IEP in 504 to discuss your college level accommodations. And this is what Maxwell was saying seems to be a little bit of a gray area in other places, because to your point, and to Richard's point in the chat as well, this is where we're seeing some confusion. Do they automatically get what the high school accommodations are? Do they have to go by what the college would do? Some like modifications wouldn't necessarily be allowed. The status quo right now seems to be what we understand from DPS is they follow the college level accommodations for the college class or classes that the student is participating in, even on the high school select level. I don't have yet a specific example of a student who perhaps had assignment modification and then didn't get it. We haven't been able to get quite that disaggregated into any data. But the good news is that they will get those accommodations on the high school level as well as on the college level. And the good news is that student is still working with the case manager and counselors, that they've already got that rapport. Whereas when they come to college select, it's kind of a whole new ballgame for them. So that is one thing that I do like about the high school select scenario, is that they're still working within the system that they're accustomed to. Additionally, like with college select though, the agreement with DPS is that the student still has to self-disclose, whether it's a high school instructor or a college adjunct. The student still needs to take that college accommodation letter and self-disclose to that instructor. I don't know if that answers your question or helps, but that's what's happening on the DPS side.
Yeah, thank you. That absolutely does. I mean, it clears up a lot. I think it's just a very confusing whole thing. You know, I think it's easily confused and it's going to remain confusing. So yeah, we have, and I knew all of that students must self-identify. I think that's probably the hardest first step. Going back to just what Jennifer was asking too, is that it's really hard to get students to self-identify, and it's really hard for them to open up their computers and write an email or pick up the phone and make a phone call and and do that. I don't know how much parent involvement there is on the high school end or K-12 side. And so if they're used to their parents doing it and it's just not something they've ever had to do um or what, but I do know that that is a big challenge. So like I said, one of the schools I serve, the case managers are great with that. They sit down, they have the students pick up the phone, they give them the phone number, they talk side by side with them, you know, this is what you should say. And then that just builds that confidence. But I know it's not happening at every school that I work for or work with.
Yeah, and one thing along those lines I wanted to mention too, and unfortunately, we've had a lot of turnover and people transitioning to other roles. So we don't have this capability right now, but on our tri-institutional campus, MSU Denver has what's called two programs. They have transition course that they run concurrently with DPS and Cherry Creek School District, where students take a semester-long course on navigating self-advocacy, knowing what their accommodations are, even being able to speak to their disability. And then also they have a day program called STEP, which also helps students learn that navigation of how to self-disclose and how to speak up for themselves. But as Linda can attest to, just generally working with high school students, I think the challenge is, like you said, getting them just to write an email or fill out an application. That in and of itself can be challenging for all of them, and then compounded if they have any type of disability. Would you want to add to that one?
No, I think, and we're going to talk about this when we talk about action steps, but a lot of the transition programs are designed for non-CE students. So like, for instance, a transition course that is through Metro, it's fantastic for students who did not take any concurrent enrollment courses. Many transition programs are for students transitioning straight from high school to traditional college. What we would like to see is some transition workshops or programs that perhaps even run during the school year for students who are students with disabilities who are taking concurrent enrollment. So they're not waiting until their junior or senior year. If they're taking a concurrent enrollment class as a freshman, they're getting, and Katie, it sounds like you guys are doing that, they're getting a little bit more transition experience right away, as opposed to moving into a program after they've already done concurrent enrollment. Ideally, it would just be either a disappointment because no one told them this when they were a concurrent enrollment student, or they would already know all of the ways to receive their accommodations, and then that transition program really isn't worth their time. So working with concurrent enrollment students with disabilities in transitioning sooner, specifically for CE. And Abe in the chat said, wonder if FYE courses can host some of these workshops. Absolutely. They absolutely can. What would be recommended is for classes that are FYE adjacent, if they're being taught on a concurrent enrollment level, then to also make sure that that difference between high school select and college select is worked into that FYE. So if that SOC with FYE is in a high school select class, discussing the details of how to get your accommodations at the high school level. If it's a college select class, making sure that the students understand it on the collegiate level. Do we want to move on to action steps? Do we have any more questions?
it looks like there's one more from Rebecca, maybe.
Yeah, HLC accreditation concern to make sure this is done right. Awesome that there could be orientation or course for students with IEPs or 504s.
Yeah,
She's given
that's
us a high five.
oh, awesome. Yeah, that's definitely, like I said, something that as we build our accessibility center staff back out, we want to get back in the business of is making that more of a thing. And just as an anecdotal sort of thing, when I first went to college back in the 90s, I went to a school in Ohio called Wright State, and they actually had a 2-day on-campus orientation just for students with accommodations, so that you learned how to navigate the accessibility office, how to do accommodations, how to navigate the dorms, how to manage your tenant care, all those sorts of things. So point being is that there are lots of great models out there. I just think that we need to work with our legislators and administrators to advocate for those to implement them. And it looks like Kristen.
Yeah, so Kristen asks a great question that will actually move us right into our action steps. So Kristen's asking, how would we identify those students, and would that transition info get to the students from case managers or college accessibility coordinators? This is actually something, Kristen, that I have been talking with Maxwell, with DPS, with other people that I know who do this work. Previously, the concern was privacy. What we garnered in our last session that we're going to go further and explore is that it sounds to us that the information is more FERPA required rather than HIPAA required. So what that means, at least for CCD, is we have a mechanism in place already. We use MS Teams that follows the FERPA requirements, FERPA requirements. And that's how we share student information already. So our inquiry sheets we use for college select enrollment information that the high school counselor communicates to the advisors. And then that's how we schedule all of our appointments. We use Teams for enrollment verification. So the theory, which is what we're going to move forward with, the theory is that we could identify students using that same mechanism that we already use to be in line with FERPA. That way we can develop some targeted communication for those students, whether we know the specific accommodation or it's just an asterisk, so that we can make sure that that student gets maybe an extra email or something from another department that says, hey, by the way, make sure you do this. These are some ideas that we've been floating around. I have counselors who discuss these things with their students. Communication obviously is a huge aspect of any concurrent enrollment. So what we're hoping is that we get everybody on board with not only the understanding of the process, but even just the recruitment. So the case managers at the high schools, they're going to be talking concurrent enrollment with the students that they help. The high school counselors are going to make sure that they are also, recruiting everybody possible to participate in concurrent enrollment, whatever level the college does for recruiting also. So everybody is saying the same message early and often, so that ideally students A, know that they're welcome to apply, and then B, also they know there is many people out here to whom I can ask my questions. And that is huge to me, especially. And that would include too, like what we're going to put on our website, right? So making sure that whatever college you're partnered with, if you have a concurrent enrollment page on your website, linking that information as well. So again, back to that communications expectation, just everywhere, often and early. Kristen's asking for the wording on FERPA. It may be the same as ours. Yeah, I can send you what I found. I learned this in the last session. So I did some Googling very quickly and found that, yes, it looks like that we would be safe to share that information. So I will send everything that I can to the concurrent enrollment conference folks, that they can include it on the materials. And then I'll also take a screenshot of your email and send that to you personally.
Yeah, and it sounds like that it's the FERPA 9 that covers everything that would be protected under HIPAA, like the protected health information in regards to students' disabilities, that as long as, putting on my IT hat for a minute, that as long as whatever database or system that you're using to share that data is FERPA compliant, then you would be covered, is what we were getting from that. So
Yeah, and Jamie Youngblood with DPS was already on the hunt. I was expecting that maybe those concurrent enrollment students, like with everything else, they fall into this weird gray area. But it sounds like to me that's not even the issue. Like they're not in a gray area. It's actually a much more simple answer. So that's great. Additionally, and Maxwell can speak more to this, other action steps that we would like to see schools take on would be training for both the high school select instructors as well as the college instructors, training on accessibility, but maybe specifically how to work with high school students and those accessibility needs and accommodations. And Maxwell can share a little bit about what we've chatted on that.
yeah. So that's one of my other hats too, as digital accessibility coordinator. I provide a lot of training just to our faculty in general on things like, how do you make your Word documents accessible? How do you make your emails accessible? How do you, read these accommodation letters? And to Wendy's point, I feel like that's an area where it does get a little ambiguous, because especially if we hire an adjunct who is primarily a K-12 high school teacher right now, and they're onboarding, they're not getting anything, well, not really any instructors, unfortunately, with them especially, they're not getting that specific training on accessibility. So we hope that we can expand that, and that would help close that equity gap, that success rate, because everybody wants data, right? And as we heard in the last lecture, we really need to be able to see those completion rates go up, those success rates go up. And I think having the instructors be best prepared as possible via a variety of formats of trainings. I do online courses where they, spend about 4 weeks in an online training, or I'll do little one-off sessions on Word accessibility, how you interact with students with disabilities. Because sad to say it, I still, get instructors sometimes where you can just tell that they're crossing their fingers that they never get a student with a disability in their whole teaching career. But statistically, even if no one discloses that they have, and they maybe not serving that student in the best way possible. So we think it's all about professional development.
Yeah, and with that too, some of the data that we got from DPS, so again, this is obviously related to the district that CCD is working with primarily, as much as 3% of concurrent enrollment students were made up with students with disabilities. So we know that there is a number of students that are already participating. Clearly, when we want to see that number go up. To Jennifer's point, how many of them are disclosing or going to the accessibility center at the college? We don't know that. We're going to try to work on how we can gather that data. The other thing that I wanted to make sure, along with Jennifer Maxwell, that we discuss is our offices, whatever office you're in, we need to be accessible. And I know my boss is in here, and I know my coworkers are in here, and they're laughing because this is a big thing of mine. We need to make sure our documentation that we're sending to students is WCAG. We need to make sure that we are doing things like asking, if you're coming to an event, do you need accommodations of any kind? We need to make sure that we're on the front of making sure that documentation, that our communications are accessible for our students. There's a positive communication model or theory that I love to use. And I think that if a student with with a disability gets a PDF and it works for them using assistive technology, imagine what that tells the student without us having to tell the student they're welcome, right? As soon as that reader starts giving them that information in the correct order, they know they're welcome. Right? That just goes so far for our students, in my opinion. So not only training our faculty, obviously, but also our offices. Melissa in the chat is asking if a student takes a class at the high school, does the student still need to or should disclose if they have a disability with the disability office at the college? Melissa, within our working with DPS, they do not need to report to the college unless they're at the college. If they are taking just a high school select class, then they only need to self-disclose with the high school and or college professor that's over that class. Any questions, comments? Anybody doing something amazing and you want to tell us how we can also be doing something amazing? I would love to know what other people are doing. We're all just quietly amazing. Maybe that's really what's happening. Maxwell, did you want to go into the college select accommodations?
Yeah, so, and again, that's something after hearing the presentation last hour, that the differences are less critical, but it's still important to understand that if the student is going to be ultimately college bound or receiving college accommodations, while they may be isolated in CE, some things that they don't get in college that they might get in high school, for example, are personal care services. You know, in high school, a lot of times I would have a para professional with me to assist with personal care, but that's not something that's typically provided by most disability services level offices. There's the whole issue around assignment modifications, which it sounds like that's more in discussion now. So if any of you have dealt with that particular issue and the differences of accommodations in your school, we'd be happy to hear about that and how you've navigated that. Oh, you know, Johnny's student in high school only has to do half of his math problems, but in college, you know, is that still a reasonable accommodation? And it sounds like it used to be more cut and dry, but now there's more leeway with it. So if anybody has any thoughts or comments on those kind of things, we'd love to hear about them.
So Richard is actually going back to discussing the accommodations offered at the high school if the student is a high school select. And Richard, basically the idea is if the student's class is located in their high school, they receive the accommodations at their high school. Other than modifications, most of the accommodations transfer fairly equally. To the point that Maxwell just made, there are sometimes some niche things that may come up that now apparently is even more confusing than before, which I think is maybe better for the students if we're working toward a more equitable access on the high school campus. But essentially, if you're a high school student taking a concurrent enrollment course at your high school, you're working with your high school's accommodation office. The only difference is, at least within the realm of DPS at the moment, is that the student has to self-disclose to their instructor, as opposed to typically when a student has an accommodation or a health issue, an email goes out to that student's teacher. Obviously, if you have a teacher coming in from outside, they're probably not getting that email. So the idea is that the students essentially is transitioned into communicating with their instructors about their accommodations. And of course, the accommodations might be somewhat tweaked due to the fact that now they're in a higher education course. But the student at the high school really has no reasonable expectation. We should have no reasonable expectation to have them come all the way to the college. We have students that are taking high school select classes that's way far from the college. So if they're at the high school, they get the high school, they work with the high school on the accommodations. If they're coming to the CC or to the college campus, or even if they're taking a sync class, that is when they really need to go to the accessibility center or whatever that version is on y'all's college campuses to receive those accommodations. I hope that helped clarify. It actually became less clear to us within the last half hour. Prior, when we came into this today, we knew the answer. And now there's some gray area over the high school modifications being allowed or not allowed, which is why we need the government to do something, I guess, apparently. The other thing that Maxwell mentioned is those students being able to receive those accommodations and what that looks like on the college level. This is again why communication from the high school side, while we have those students working with those counselors, transition workshops, transition training that's happening on the high school level, whether it's in partner with the college and the high school accommodation staff, helping those students understand before they have to go to the college. Just kind of giving them some practice. What does it look like to have to approach a professor and disclose your accommodation or send that email with that accommodation list? There's a great dissertation out there about this whole thing, running simulations, running panels of students and faculty. And this is kind of how you can work through having to do these self-disclosures. Obviously, it's not an easy thing for anyone. And the more we can do with our CE students as part of college preparation, the better. Then that way, when they are trad students, because no matter where they go, they're likely going to have to self-disclose. There are a few colleges that are moving away from that model, but unfortunately, it's not moving fast enough. So yeah, I mean, I don't want to end like super early and make everybody feel like we didn't offer any assistance. I know that there's a lot of areas where people might still be kind of unsure or confused. I know that with our office at CCD, the 3 advisors that were recently hired, this is brand new at CCD. Having this much staff going into the high schools, this is brand new for us. And so we are still also in the building stage of what can this look like? How can we partner with the dean people? How can we partner with the DPS folks to A, better orient, B, better outreach, and then C, and I won't pull the punch like Carla did, this is not being talked about, right? And like the anger that I feel when I go to conference after conference or meeting after meeting where we talk about removing barriers, I think barriers need to be removed. This population of students unfortunately goes completely unmentioned in so many spaces. And that's where I am really encouraged by this conference. They had 2, and then there was I think maybe a third breakout session all on students with disabilities. We're winning. I mean, at least we're all here. There's a huge number of you here. That is so encouraging to me. We're gonna look really good on the next report that Knowledge Works puts out, I think is.
Linda, this is Tammy.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Hey.
Yep.
Thanks for being here. This is great. I'm wondering, because I'm with you, I feel like we've been getting mixed messages for this kind of got to the forefront of the conversation probably the last 4 or 5 months. And I think we're getting a little bit of mixed messages. So I'm like, I'm wondering if this is something we could take to and maybe get Carla to talk to at the Disability Services Directors meeting or something, to where
Absolutely
opening it up like for the community college system to have this conversation, because I don't think we're all on the same page at all. So,
no, and I Yeah, and I, I actually went to her session at NASEP, and I didn't put together that it was the same person, but I was still very excited. But she said it really well at NASEP, and she mentioned it today, where she's like, the law, the legalities is not what we should be shooting for, right? Like that should be maybe the groundwork,
Or, yeah.
but this should just be something we care about for student success, right? I do know that, like, looking at MOUs, making sure that our students with disabilities are specifically in our communications with our schools, within our schools, is really important as well.
Sure.
And then I saw something in the chat as well. Louis had a question about if the student self-discloses to a college who is aware of it. Typically, they would go to the disability services. And then what a lot of colleges are doing now, something that was started at CCD here is during the pandemic, the instructors were automatically emailed the accommodation letters for those students, for all students, regardless of whether they were concurrent enrollment or not. So that way the instructor had a heads up. And I'm one of those people that's kind of on the fence about that, in terms of self-disclosure and advocacy. But at the same time, I also recognize that can be helpful for the instructor to know who's coming ahead of time. So we'll see what the future brings as far as that automatic disclosure process. So that's a good question. Thank you.
I've just put our emails in the chat as well. If anybody has suggestions, ideas, or has questions for us, please feel free to communicate with us. We're going to share out as much as we can to Tammy, to the CE conference, but obviously there may be there were lots of things that I thought about after my meeting with Miss Youngblood at DPS that I was like, oh, now I have 5,000 more questions. So do feel free to reach out at any time.
Yeah, and one thing I did want to point out too, just Gwyneth, as we're wrapping up the last few minutes or so, maybe elaborate more on how CE has grown at CCD, that's why you are where you are. And
yeah. So Scott, many of you probably know Scott Gallegos. He was the one man show in that office. He had Nick, who was working on data, but Scott was our one advisor, handling all of the schools, all of the students, and he is amazing. Yes, Guadalupe, he's amazing. And I think he has been eating, sleeping, and breathing concurrent enrollment since he was himself a high school student. So he knows it. He knows that life. But we received a Dean grant. Thank you to any Dean people in here. And 3 of us were hired. So Priyanka Tucker, Abraham Sanchez, and myself. We are an amazing team. I'm just going to tell you, we're all delightful and wonderful people. And we now service all of DPS under the Dean grant. The 3 of us, our schools are all within DPS. We all have probably between 7 and 10 schools, if I was guessing. And our numbers for this fall, concurrent enrollment made up 25% of our FTE. So that's a pretty large number. In my opinion, I want to say, however, to put it in context, Scott was handling, and I think Scott's in here, I think it was something like 17% of the school population on his own at one time. So I'm glad for him that he has help, but I can't imagine handling 17% of the college population on my own. So, but he's amazing and probably has a Starbucks addiction due to handling 17% of the population on his own. But yeah, the 3 of us are in there. We all have a territory. The counselors that I work with, I can only speak for them. None of them are in here, so they don't know I'm saying this about them, but they're all amazing. I have some that have a lot more experience working with students with disabilities, and I have some that don't have really any as far as concurrent enrollment, but they're all very open and very willing and ready to make this work for our students with disabilities. So I'm really, really excited about that.
Yeah, so just to sort of put things in the context of where we were and where we're at now. So I think that's helpful to know. And yeah, and I think I've heard, wasn't it the number now is like 25% of our population is concurrent enrollment?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the last number.
Yeah, so that's huge. So when we, like to Wendy's point a little bit ago, when we talk about closing equity gaps for a variety of groups like race, gender, things like that, I really think that that's where disability again needs to step up in this game and be acknowledged, and also acknowledging, you know, intersectionality, just to get on one of my other passions of really recognizing that I may be a woman with a disability, but I'm also a white woman with a disability. So I recognize that I have that privilege. So really reaching out to students who might be minorities and have a disability. So anything we can do to get those students on CE and on a path to success.
So I look forward to seeing all of you at the state capitol to demand some legislation. I know that Carla mentioned in the previous that the Rise Up bill can't seem to get through Washington, but that doesn't obviously stop the states from doing it. So I don't know how to write bills, but I'll bring coffee to the meeting, and I'll bring all of the muffins of the land to the state office, and we can get something going. But yeah, that's what we've got. Unless you guys got any more suggestions or questions, go get some more coffee or tea or chai, whatever you're drinking.
Yeah. Thank you all. Thanks for coming. It was great chatting with everyone, getting to know your situations. So yeah, email us. We're always happy to chat.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, I think we have about 15 minutes before our next session. So we'll see you in the next session. Thanks to Wendeth and Maxwell.
Thanks.